Today, we're digging into an 800-year-old book from Japan that, honestly, feels like it could have been written yesterday. It's called the Gukansho, and it's basically a survivor's guide for how to make sense of the world when everything you know is falling apart. To really get what this book is about, you have to imagine a total civilizational collapse. And I'm not just talking about a change in government. No. We're talking about a shift in reality as big as the fall of the Roman Empire, or maybe the transition from the Tang to the Song dynasty in China. An entire way of life, an entire idea of culture and power was just vanishing. And in its place, something new, something pretty brutal and unfamiliar was rising up. For the people living through this in 13th century Japan, it really felt like the end of the world. In Buddhist thought, they had a name for it, Mappo, the latter day of the law. It was this prophesied age of chaos and decline, where things were so bad that enlightenment was basically impossible. So you can imagine the nihilism. And this story, it was written by a man standing right in the middle of those ruins, just trying to figure out if there was any reason to keep going. But here's the thing, this isn't just a story about despair. It's a story of some serious intellectual courage. See, a single monk living through all this chaos came up with a totally radical new way of looking at history to make sense of the turmoil. And honestly, his insights are a powerful lesson for our own pretty turbulent times. So to see how he pulled this off, we're going to walk through 5 key ideas. First, we'll set the scene of his world literally ending. Then we'll meet the author, a guy writing history from the perspective of the losing side. After that, we'll uncover his secret law of history. Fourth, we'll see how he applied this cold, hard logic to reality. And finally, we'll look at what his warning means for us today. All right, let's dive in. First, let's really paint a picture of this collapsing world. For centuries, Japan had been all about this elegant, aristocratic age, but that was all about to change, big time. For hundreds of years, Japan was ruled from its capital, Kyoto, by this class of super refined aristocrats. Their entire world was built on ritual, tradition, and poetry. Power was subtle, But out in the provinces, a totally new force was bubbling up, the samurai. These warriors, who started out as just hired muscle for the nobility, they valued raw power, violence, and just getting things done. So while the aristocrats in Kyoto were busy writing poems, the warriors out in Kamakura were building an army. It was a complete clash of civilizations. And that brings us to the author of the Gukansho, a monk named Jien. Now, he wasn't just some random guy watching from the sidelines. He was perfectly positioned to document the fall of his own world from the inside out. Jien was the ultimate insider. He was born into the Fujiwara clan, the most powerful family of aristocrats, period. His brother was basically the emperor's right-hand man, and Jien himself was the head of the most powerful Buddhist sect in the country. He was standing at the absolute peak of the old world, which gave him a front-row seat to its total destruction, trying to guard a system that was failing right before his eyes. And this is exactly why his work is so incredible. He wasn't writing to celebrate a victory. He was writing to understand a crushing defeat. He was asking, why are we, the noble, the cultured, being beaten by these barbarians? Have the gods just abandoned us? His book is this raw, personal quest to make sense of a reality that just shattered everything he ever believed in. Now, in his search for answers, Jien didn't turn to gods or myths. Nope. Instead, he developed this absolutely groundbreaking philosophy of history, and it all centered on one powerful idea. He called this concept Dori. It kind of translates to reason or principle. And Jien's revolutionary idea was that history isn't just one random thing after another. He argued that under the surface of all the chaos, there's an invisible, unstoppable flow, an internal logic. He was basically saying, centuries before guys like Hegel or Marx, that history is a process and it has a direction. And Jien saw this story as something that actually changes over time. He mapped out 3 distinct ages. First, you had the ancient age, when divine emperors ruled directly. Then, as their power started to fade, you get the Middle Age, when wise aristocrats, like his own family, stepped in to help out. But now, he concluded, the aristocrats had become powerless too. The Dori had shifted again. And now it was the age of the warriors, who were needed to keep order with brute force. He saw it as this process of decay, sure, but a logical and unstoppable one. And this right here was his core insight. He stopped seeing change as the enemy. Instead, he redefined change itself as the fundamental law of the universe. For Jien, the cosmic rule, the Damjai, was change. And by accepting that, he could finally start to accept the horrifying new world taking shape all around him. But this wasn't just some abstract theory for Jien. He applied this cold, hard logic directly to the political crisis that was blowing up in his face. See, the old aristocratic world was obsessed with purity. They hated what they called kagare, this spiritual pollution they believed came from things like blood and death. So the warriors, who lived and died by the sword, were seen as fundamentally polluted. But Jien, a high priest, mind you, made this stunningly pragmatic argument. He basically said, look, in this age of chaos, our pure prayers aren't enough. To restore order, he said, you have to use poison to counteract poison. He argued the warriors were a necessary evil, a bitter pill his entire class had to swallow if they wanted to survive. And his theory was about to get the ultimate test. The warriors' power had been growing for decades. By 1220, right when Jien was writing his book, the ex-emperor in Kyoto was actually planning a rebellion to crush the warrior government. Jien was horrified. He saw this as a move that completely failed to understand the new Dori. He wrote the Gukansho as a desperate warning, pleading with the court not to start a war they absolutely could not win. But they ignored him. The result was a complete catastrophe for the old order. The emperor's rebellion was crushed almost instantly. And then, in a move that shocked the entire nation, the warrior government actually punished and exiled the emperor. This had never, ever happened before. It was the final, brutal proof that Jien had been right all along. The age of warriors was here to stay, and the age of aristocrats was officially over. So why does this 800-year-old story of defeat matter to us right now? Well, because Jien's core challenge, trying to figure out the unstoppable flow of history during a time of massive change, is exactly the challenge we're facing today. Just think about the parallels for a second. Jien faced the rise of the warriors, a pragmatic, disruptive new force. We're facing the rise of AI and automation. He watched his established order collapse. We're seeing the global order we took for granted get disrupted. For him, old values became obsolete overnight. And for us, well, the obvious rules for success and stability seem to be crumbling right before our very eyes. Jimlin's lesson is that surviving turbulent times isn't about clinging to the past or yelling ideologies. It's about having the intellectual honesty to look at the world as it is, not as we wish it was. It's about having the flexibility to adapt to change, even when that change is really painful and kind of frightening. And that leaves us with one last question. Jien figured out that the rise of the warriors was the unstoppable Dori of his time. So, what's the Dori of our time? What is that fundamental, irresistible flow of change that's reshaping our world? And maybe, more importantly, do we have the same courage as that 13th century monk to actually face it head on?